So, Humberto, have you ever been watching the news or reading an article or seeing a photograph or something or a Facebook post, a Twitter tweet,
a social verse
a
thing.
YouTube tube, what do they call it? Anyway, that you watch and you're like amazed by, you're like, oh my God, I can't believe that happened, or whoa, a new scientific advancement, or like the thing for me
all the time, by the way.
The thing for me that I always think about is when Sarah Palin was running for vice president 10 years ago-ish, there was a picture that was being circulated on the internet of her in a bikini.
With a gun?
With guns.
Yeah.
And she's by the pool.
Yeah.
And when I saw the picture, I was just like, wow, that's a pretty, salacious picture or embarrassing picture. And then at dinner with my family, we're sitting at this restaurant, and everyone's talking about various things. And I said, "Yeah, you know that picture of Sarah Palin in that bikini with the AK-47 or whatever." And my cousin turns to me and he's like, "I'm pretty sure that's a fake picture."
Wait, was this at a Japanese restaurant?
Were you there?
I think I was there.
You might have been the one to tell me.
I don't know if I was the one to tell you, but I remember this.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because I remember this conversation.
Well, I might have told you about this too.
Oh, you might have, but
at any rate, maybe you were there. But the point is I was mortified because I saw this picture, and I knew about Photoshop, and I knew about people who would doctor such things and try to pass it off as real. And I beat myself up in that moment thinking, why didn't you at least question the veracity of this picture?
Right.
It's on the internet. It has to do with politics. It's a unlikely scenario.
Yeah.
Like the chance that Sarah Palin would take a picture in a bikini with an AK-47, it's not very high.
Right.
So, filter, Kirk. Like, why did I just hated that about myself. And have you ever been in a situation like that?
Certainly. Yeah. I had moved to this country. I was 15, and I was living with my mom and my little brother, younger brother. And I come home from high school. So I think I'm 15, yeah. Come home from high school one day, and I'm the first one home. And I see this letter that's waiting for us.
Oh.
And I'm like, oh my God. Because it basically tells me some great news.
You're a millionaire.
And so I'm waiting for my brother to get home. My brother gets home next because it's like he gets dropped off by the bus. And I'm like, you're not going to believe it. He's like, what? We are rich. And then he goes, what? And I show him the letter. And it's from Ed McMahon or whatever. And he's like, and he's little, but he goes, oh, I think those are not real. And I go, wait, what? No. Look, read. And I read it, and it says, you have won $1 million. Like, what is that? We have won $1 million. All we have to do is fill out this information and submit it. And I convinced him, he was pushing back a little bit, but I finally convinced him, and he was like, oh my God, you're right. And then we both worked each other up into a frenzy. So by the time my mom got home, we were, oh my God, Mom, you can't believe it. Like we were bouncing off the walls, and she's like, what? And then we were bursting. We're telling her, we're millionaires. And then she's like, what are you talking about? And we show her the letter. And of course, she knows 1,000,000,000% what's up. And so,
well, is there something from your adult life that you can somehow
but my point
make me
with
feel less
that,
stupid about my Sarah Palin picture?
Well, but my point with that story
is just a cute story.
Well, yeah, but I was 15, right? But the thing is,
15. You're from
but then it
Colombia.
kept happening, dude. I would get the calls from the penny a month club, and then I would subscribe to all the magazines, and I kept falling. I fell for the Quick Star thing where they were like, "Oh, we're recruiters from a high tech company." So my point is, I had this pattern for falling for things, right?
Oh.
So when those email chains started in the mid 90s, I took a serious look at that email from the prince in Nigeria, and I was like, holy shit.
You did?
I mean, I didn't do anything about it, but I seriously was like, whoa, this sounds incredible, right? And then when time went on, and like I think the first social media thing was MySpace that I was involved with. People post stuff on there all the time, and I remember the things that I would be amazed by and never double check were a lot of the celebrity stories. People would post celebrity stories all the time. And I was like, I don't know. And to this day, I don't know how many were real or not real, because I would just assume these were real stories.
Yeah, so that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about critical thinking skills, because an anonymous patron wrote in, she said, how can I improve my critical thinking skills?
Right.
For example, in a recent podcast you did, you critiqued an article from fatherly.com that tried to suggest that attachment theory was incorrect. Admittedly, I am someone who sometimes takes these articles at surface value, so when I read one, when I read their claims tend not to question it too much. I remember listening to a different podcast you did wherein you mentioned how a number of the writers who cite these studies are not trained in reading them properly, as well as how many of these writers will quote studies that have a super small sample size. What are some of the signs we should look for in these types of articles? So let's get into that. This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. Who are you, Humberto?
My name is Humberto Castañeda. Can't say my last name. And I repair faucets and I do other handiwork.
So regarding research articles and these sort of technical articles that are written, let me ask the question. So regarding news articles or blog posts or internet things that say this study does this, or attachment theory isn't a thing, and let me provide you with the science regarding why attachment theory isn't a thing. How does one navigate the reading of that so that they don't get duped?
Right. So I'll tell you from my perspective, I'll just tackle one narrow topic, which is nutrition. What happened to me around nutrition information.
Yeah.
Because this is true of any subject matter. It's definitely true of nutrition. So 3 years ago, I was not diagnosed, but I went to the doctor, got blood tests, and my blood results were really bad. I had high everything that's bad and low everything that's good and whatever. So I decided to change my diet.
How are your midichlorians?
Oh, the midichlorian count was strong with that one. And I decided to change my diet. So I went and started trying to do research. And, before that, I had read the Zone books. I'd read the Zone. So I was generally aware I was generally aware, certainly a lot of sugar is not good and stuff like this. And I had already been buying organic food for many years. I didn't like the idea of cruelty to animals and all that. But I started looking for information out there, and I quickly became overwhelmed. Because everyone claims to be an expert. Everything seems to be disproven by something else, and there's articles everywhere and things. And so at first I really struggled with this, and I wasn't sure what I could believe. Something that was really helpful for me is I found a channel called nutritionfacts.org, and what this channel does is, rather than just kind of regurgitate opinions that they've had or that they heard or whatever, the whole point of the channel is this guy reviews the published peer-reviewed studies, and he summarizes the results of the studies. And he provides recommendations and conclusions based on not one study, not two studies, but dozens and hundreds of ongoing studies.
Good. So as I go through my principles that I just came up with, in the hour before we started recording, let me know which of the principles you followed on this path.
Okay.
Because I'm guessing that at least
there's some matches here.
Yeah. Number one, when you are trying to figure out the truth, actually maybe rule 0 to add before all this, now that I'm typing, is our science is young. So there's this notion, this bias, that we've figured out 99% of the natural world.
Right.
And that is not true. At any given point, humans generally think that. Back when we were bleeding people and we were doing that up until the mid 20th century, by the way. We thought, we figured it out. We've been doing this for years, and it's been working for years.
Right.
So what's the chance that today, in 2019, or what's the chance that in 100 years we're not going to look back at 2019 and think, or what, anyway, what's the chance that in 2119, we're going to look back at 2019 and go like, boy, we really had figured out most of science by that point. We are in our infancy. I mean, think about, we're likely to be around for the next, 10, 20, 100,000 years as a species. In some, ups and downs, let's say.
If we make it through each gate, yes.
Yeah. The next gate is, climate change. We're likely to, some of us are likely to survive, if not most of us. And the science that is going to be advanced, the advancement of science, the deeper understanding, the deeper levels of a resolution that you can actually look at things like neurons and cell function and systemic function of the body, genetics, all these kinds of is just going to be so much more advanced in the future. So that's rule 0, is like understand that you might be barking up a tree that is not the tree you should be barking up. What you should be barking up is trying to get a time machine and go into the future 200 years and ask them the answer to this question. So,
wait, and then you get there and they're like, whoa, stop. You invented a time machine?
Yeah.
Way to bury the lead.
So do you think about that? Like, okay, I'm going to go to this site and I'm going to look at the research and I'm going to try to glean answers to guide my life so that I can be healthy, so that I can live longer and live a more healthy lifestyle. Do you think, well, there might not actually be the science available yet to really...
Oh, dude. And not only do I think that, but I've ran into that wall. So one of the things that came out in that when I did that blood test was this T4 and T3 values. They're related to your thyroid. And one of them was a little elevated. And, through when I talked to the doctor, she said, well, we probably should start... What we might want to do is we'll run the test again in a few months. And if it's still high, we'll just start giving you synthetic hormone for your thyroid. And I read up on it. And it's basically, once you start on that, that's the rest of your life. Now, it's fine. People live long, healthy lives with that synthetic hormone. But your thyroid starts actually at that point like shutting down and being like, okay, you got this? All right, cool. I'm outie. And I was like, fuck, really? And then the thing that I realized was that it might be this autoimmune response they call Hashimoto's. And I'm like, oh, fuck. So I looked up, well, what's the Hashimoto's cure? There's no Hashimoto's cure. Okay. Well, what can I do for Hashimoto's? There's nothing you can do for Hashimoto's. And I'm like, really? And then I started looking everywhere. And then some people were saying, no, actually, you can do this. And some people are no, nothing works. And I was like, wait, there's this thing out there that people are aware of. And no one knows what to do for it at all. And there's barely any studies. I can't find... Why is this happening?
Right. Yeah, because you were seduced by particularly maybe the American narrative.
Sure.
That we have everything figured out.
We have doctors.
And there's a solution for everything.
We have universities.
Especially if you have the money.
Right.
Right? Like if you got the money, we got the cure.
That's the other one, by the way, that... I was convinced, right? Because you hear such and such billionaire just died, the Coke billionaire died and stuff. You would think, well, these people have so much money. I'm sure they're not going to get a normal disease or normal heart attacks. Like, no, man, these people still die from heart attacks, cancer, strokes, all sorts of stuff.
Right. So that's rule 0. Rule 1 is look for a consensus among experts. It's important to not trust the claim of just one person. Even if they're citing lots of research, it's important to look to the consensus. Examples of strong consensuses are the following. Climate change is at least partially caused by humans. There is an overwhelming consensus among experts,
right,
not among politicians, but among people who actually study the science and don't have a political agenda, that climate change is at least partially caused by humans, if not like 90% caused by humans.
By the way, right there when you said, and don't have a political agenda, the point of looking at what the majority is finding in their findings is to try to rule out any little bumps and biases and little anomalies, because you're not looking at one person, you're looking at a mass of scientists.
Right.
It's highly unlikely that all of them have the same exact bias for all the same exact reasons.
Exactly. something like 98% of climate scientists agree that climate change is at least partially caused by humans. And they all could be wrong, you know, but the likelihood that someone else has a better answer is extremely limited. Smoking raises risk of cancer.
Right.
Okay. Most of us understand that. Why do we understand that? Well, that's because for whatever reason, the consensus among those scientists has become accepted by general culture. Smoking raises risk of cancer. Sun damage to skin raises risk of cancer. Why do we understand? There was a time when that was debated.
Oh, yeah.
And there was a time before that, before no one even thought that was possible.
Right.
So how did we develop that? Well, we studied it. We looked at many different angles. We didn't just look at humans, but we looked at rats. We looked at how often someone got sunburnt. We looked at the physics behind photons and charged particles and radiation and what it has on any molecule, let alone DNA. And we pull all those different findings and observations together, and the consensus among physicians who study such things, cancer and the skin, their consensus is, it's probably 97% or something, agree that according to the evidence, it does, there's strong evidence that the more sun damage you have to your skin, the greater your risk for cancer of the skin.
Yep.
Another strong consensus is general relativity. There are many cranks who refute general relativity.
Yeah.
Many cranks will say, like, Einstein was wrong.
Right.
Many cranks will say, like, no, I figured it out. It's not general relativity, it's blank. It's one of the classic narcissistic sort of tropes, really, is to claim that Einstein wasn't right. But you talk to all of the experts, not cranks, people who actually studied it for their entire lives, 99% of them agree general relativity holds up under scrutiny of the evidence.
It relatively does.
And that's the consensus. To lose weight, you need to lower your calories and to increase your exercise, mainly lowering your calories. That's the consensus.
Right.
Now, you will find many people that will say, like, you don't need to lower your calories. You can eat as much as you want.
Right.
Or you don't need to exercise. You can just sit on your ass all day. It's all, there are many different cranks that will claim, or if you take this pill, you will lose weight. Or if you have a positive attitude, you will, there are many people, but you go to the experts, not the people who are online. We're talking about the experts. Now, the problem is, one, consensus is sometimes wrong, which can confuse people. But the other complication is, how does the public, how does Joe Schmo access the consensus?
Right.
Where do you find that? There's not consensus.org. Like, if you're trying to look for the consensus on diet, where do you go?
Wikipedia.
Maybe Wikipedia is probably like a good place to go to as one of the 100 places you would look.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be the place for sure.
Yeah, but Wikipedia wouldn't have an entry for the best human diet. What they have is diet.
But they might say the consensus is, and
Sure.
Wikipedia because it's looked at by a lot of eyes.
It's
it tends
very
to
curated.
It tends to gravitate towards the consensus. Googling what diet should I have will give you the opposite result.
Right.
So that's one of the hard things about our society today. So for you, when you look at that diet site, do you believe that that's the consensus?
Oh, so when I stumbled upon that, it was the way I stumbled upon this was I found a video on YouTube from this Dr. Michael Greger giving a talk at one of the tech companies, and he was just giving a talk. And the guy talks very funny, but I sat there and I listened, and I'm like, oh, okay, this is a little different kind of content than a lot of the other videos I've been watching, because a lot of those other videos are just, here's this thing I tried and it's worked for me. This guy was not talking at all about, like, here's the thing I tried and worked for me. He was talking about studies, and he was quoting and citing studies, and then he was talking about not only like one study, but whole like meta studies. And
great, and I'm wondering where this is headed. But this is not consensus. This is one person identifying lots of research, which is great, which isn't just one study, and it's not anecdote. So it's not anecdote. He's not just one study. It's many studies, but it's still just one person.
Well, no, but you're one person talking about the consensus, right? Meaning you were just saying that there's consensus about relativity.
Right.
But it's
there
because
is a consensus about relativity.
That's right. It's because you're quoting the fact that there is a consensus.
Right. So,
and that's what he's doing. He's saying, look.
So he's talking about he's not talking about himself, his own findings. He's talking about here are these other people that are also saying this.
In other words, he's not saying, okay, here's one study that shows this. It's like, here are like whole swaths of 20 years worth of studies, and they all seem to point to these generalities. So that's the consensus.
Well, that's not a consensus. The
certainly,
consensus is how to read. And so this is actually a key distinction, and maybe you're getting to this, but for people out there, is one person can lay out a lot of studies,
right,
which is definitely away from Crankville,
right,
and towards Soundville or Trueville, or as close to truth as we can get. Empiricalville, let's just call it. So we got Crankville and Empiricalville. So one person citing lots of studies is getting closer to Empiricalville, but one person can still not understand what they're looking at, and they can also cherry pick 10 studies that are sort of demonstrating their point or something. Not that the person is malicious, but it's just the way. How many experts look at all the research in that area of diet research and conclude the same thing? You know, sure. So it's not just one person looking at 10 studies. It's 1,000 diet experts looking at all the data, and what's the overarching consensus conclusion?
Right, but so not every field has, for example, a panel that's been accredited as being the consensus agreeer, right?
Almost no field
has.
Yeah.
So the only thing one can do to try to understand in some of these cases whether there is apparently consensus is to look at the vast quantity of the studies and see if there are things that keep coming up over and over and over as consistent conclusions.
That's one, but with diet particularly, and this is because I'm just as a layperson as you are when it comes to this, that I would, and I have, relied on sources that I trust that are experts and are much better able to read the studies and interpret the overarching conclusions. I mean, some diet research studies, I don't even understand half of what they're talking about. You know, it's like the language is very technical. You know what I mean? So like, for example, my physicians that I talk to, I trust them.
Right.
I trust dietitians that I talk to. Not every dietitian, because I've actually talked to some dietitians who are not, they don't say to me what I've heard from other people, or 90% of what this dietitian said tend to agree with what other dietitians said. So I'm waiting for that leap that you're making.
But there's the problem, right? Like, you need, what you're saying is essentially you need, I don't know, hundreds of Michael Gregors saying the same thing.
Maybe 10.
Right. Okay. So, but
like, what does your physician say about Michael Greger?
Well, I don't know about my physician, but the point is that, like, you have to start with something, right?
Right. So you started. Have you asked your physician what they think about Michael Greger?
No, but that's.
Have you asked anybody what they think about Michael Greger?
I haven't asked people I know, because no one I know knows who Michael Greger is. But I've certainly.
Or the findings that Michael Greger.
Well, I've certainly watched a whole bunch of other people that are doctors and experts who talk about Michael Greger, but it's not just about Michael Greger. It's because, again,
it's about the findings.
We talk about the same studies and the same epidemiologic studies and the same meta-analyses and the same decades worth, blah, blah, blah. And a lot of them.
What are the conclusions by them? I'm just curious.
Well, in this case, it's like the main stuff is, meat and processed meats lead to inflammation and higher risk of cancer. The populations that tend to have the longest longevity tend to have the highest amount of vegetables, like whole plant-based kind of ingredients in their diets, definitely including beans, right? Like, these are some of the commonalities. But my point is that, like, there are many different kinds of players in this field.
Right. So I would imagine that most physicians would agree that vegetables are good for you, that eating more vegetables and that Americans in general don't eat enough vegetables.
Right. But I feel like traditionally that's been sort of well, yeah, like that's their opinion, man, you know?
Well, no. From my understanding of the science, epidemiology studies, they take, 1,000 people and they say, how many vegetables do you eat?
Sure.
And then they track to see how soon they die, and the people who eat less vegetables die sooner.
But it's like, well, a counterexample is what's happened with vitamins, is that, there's been studies that show that people that eat more vegetables and fruit tend to have lower incidence of cancers, right? And so the thinking is like, well, there must be some ingredient in there that's helping. And then through many years, they figured, it seems to be like these antioxidant reactions. Okay, great. So then they do antioxidant tests on cells and in small animals, and they seem to have an effect. Then they do antioxidant vitamin supplements with humans, and they seem to either not have any effect or in some cases have negative effects.
Right.
So I go, oh, wait, what?
Well, that's because their original conclusion was wrong, or the antioxidants have to be, and I'm not a biologist by any means, but from my understanding of that scientific question, is the antioxidants have to be in the midst of the delivery of the vegetable, which also carries with it a lot of other things that we actually don't even understand.
And that's what many folk now believe, is that, first of all, there's not one antioxidant. There's like gazillions of antioxidant variants, right? And vegetables and fruit have like tons and tons of different variants of them. And they have a whole bunch of other ingredients.
Right. But
so we probably don't understand the full interaction.
Yeah, and it could, right, exactly. Right. There's a lot of different,
but that's the kind of example I'm saying. So like the conclusion isn't you need vitamin supplements. The conclusion is you need vegetables and fruits, because that's the only thing that the data so far seems to be showing.
Right.
Now, to your point about early young science, the problem is the reason I can't give you the same kind of consensus as relativity for this is because there isn't in that sense. What there is are there results after results that seem to be coming up consistently in studies. But the fact is that there are way too many people that are still not on the same page.
Right.
And so if you're asking me, is there consensus in the field of nutrition? You're probably right. There isn't enough consensus in the field.
But there are some things that from what I understand, my look at those experts, there are some things that you can glean from that they will almost universally agree with.
Yes.
Like eat more vegetables.
Well, that's a great example.
Don't eat sugar. Make sure you're hydrated sufficiently. How much that means is somewhat debatable, but there's probably extremes at the low end of hydration that you could probably just sort of intuit. Don't drink alcohol that much. Don't drink caffeine that much.
Right. So these are great examples. So the vegetable in particular is a really good example, because recently this other doctor, right, another person came out with a book, and I don't know if it's recent, but they had this book and they had this whole thing about how plants will kill you. And they, because it's talking about these actual things that are called oxalates and things like, if you eat plants, your stomach's gonna eventually die, your intestines will die, all these things, right? Well, the consensus of the community rejected that, right? Because they said, well, okay, no, that's crazy.
Now, okay, so good. So I'm positive this crank had a lot of data.
Yes.
And anecdote.
Yes.
And,
and real stuff, because there are real ingredients in some things like spinach and other things. Blah, blah, blah.
It's sort of like the fallacy of like, well, anyway, so let's go on. But so right here, right away, we're demonstrating that it's hard for something as simple as diet. It's hard to find the consensus.
Right.
And who has time for that shit? Right. And that's just about diet. I mean, imagine if it was something like, the article I read where the guy wrote this article about how attachment theory was proven to be not real. Right. And they were actually talking with experts who said attachment theory is bogus.
Yeah.
And how does someone find the consensus on attachment theory? It's really hard. So, but try. And if you don't have the consensus, if you don't have a good bead on the consensus, then know that you might not know the answer to the question yet, and allow yourself to have that question mark. And I want to appreciate what you're doing right now, which is this is just my take on the way you're talking about this. Over the past few years, and maybe even 10 or 15 years, you've gone down a lot of rabbit holes on the internet around, zone diet or whatever, and have been convinced or persuaded of certain things and maybe tried out certain things. And then you read more and you're like, well, wait a second. I think I was convinced down a certain road where half of it was true and half of it wasn't. And you're allowing yourself to be like, oh, I think that one person I can't really depend on. I was totally on board. I mean, the zone diet thing was such a big thing in the 90s.
Right.
I can't even remember the doctor's name, but it was such a big thing. And some of that, it seems to be the consensus today, but some of it seems to not be the consensus today.
Right.
So the point is that you're not locked in. And then you're even allowing yourself to say, like, I've spent a lot of time on this topic to look into it and to really become a sort of expert layperson in the area of diet, because I'm really concerned about what I eat and my own health. And I'm still kind of lost. I have to admit that I have to just say, I still have just a basic understanding that my grandma probably could have told me. You know what I mean?
Well, and
that humility and that willingness to say, I don't know, and maybe my conclusions are wrong, is very important to the skeptical mind.
Totally.
And the critically thinking mind.
And I'll say another thing that's through this process, and actually through that site, that he's got all these videos and stuff. The way he does his videos aren't just, here's the latest tip, you should eat more avocados, right? The thing is, he actually, like, in his videos, he goes through the studies and he talks about their conclusions and what was, in many cases, he talks about potential flaws, potential conflicts of interest, like all these kinds of things. So one thing that made me interested in it, because he annotates all the links to all the actual studies, is I actually started looking through studies. And it's a slog. Some of the stuff is really hard to parse through, right? And I know you know that. So, but I started doing it. And it's a great new skill. As an example, just a few days ago.
Well, I'm going to interrupt you.
Okay.
Because, so I got tip 0, rule 0.
Right.
Remember, our science is young. 2, or 1, look for the consensus. 2, learn how to read research.
Yes.
It's hard, but it's practice. And if you're in college or you're going to go to college, try to take as many intro to research classes as you can take. It's very helpful. The way I learned how to read, I was a therapist for 10 years before I really understood how to read research. I'd got my master's, I'd read research, but reading research is something you only learn, one, by reading. I've read thousands and thousands of research articles, Yeah. And 2, actually having someone explain to you statistics and how all that works. And so, you have to learn about sample size, replication, effect size, correlation or causation, degrees of freedom, cherry picking, general statistics. Like, for example, like, I had a dream. This is a little bit off topic, but it's related. Before 9/11, about a month, I had a very vivid dream. And I woke up, and I might have even written it down, but it was very vivid to me. This is before 9/11. This is, August 11 or something.
Yeah.
2001. And I'm in a building, it's all glass. Like, it's one of those very fancy, office buildings that's lots of glass. And I walk out the front door, and I look up, and I see this jetliner, 747 kind of jetliner, and it's flying kind of erratically.
Yikes.
But it's flying straight towards me and all the other people. And I'm like, holy shit. And it flies in to the building right above my head.
Oh my God.
Like 40 stories up. And because my brain, because this had never happened before, it wasn't intuitive that it would explode. You know, seeing the clips on TV, you see the thing instantly, the jet fuel just instantly explodes, right? That didn't make sense to me. I didn't think it would ignite. So the way I dreamt it was all the fuel fell on all of us who were standing outside and didn't ignite. And so I'm sitting there, this thing goes, you know, and the glass goes everywhere, and the fuel, you know, sort of rains down from the sky and lands on me and everyone else. And I go, for some reason, I was like, you got to get inside because then we won't burn up or something. I was like, so we all ran inside the building. Okay. Pretty close to 9/11. I mean, not exactly, of course.
But ridiculously close.
Okay.
That never had happened.
Right. It had never happened in the history of the world.
Never had there been a movie where it happened.
Not even a movie. But I had a dream about it a month before. So then 9/11 happens. And like a day later or something after the trauma, I remember wait, I had a dream last month. And da-da-da-da-da. And I said to myself, because I have, you know, I'm part human who was just like, I must have had a premonition. On the other hand, when we understand statistics and you understand coincidence and you understand actually how probability works, the chance that in my lifetime, the chance that I would have had a dream so specific about 9/11 within a week of 9/11, prior to 9/11, the chance is probably like 1,000,000 to 1 or something.
Probably worse.
Yeah, it's very low likelihood that would have happened. So you're like, well, then
ipso facto.
It must be that some other explanation. It can't be coincidence.
Right.
It's too specific. Okay, but that's the wrong question to ask. The other question is, what's the likelihood that in my lifetime I will randomly have a dream that will randomly match up with an event in my life or in the news, a story I hear? What's the chance that in my lifetime I will have, at some point in my 48 years on this planet, I will remember one dream that will coincide in part with an event within a year after? The chance of that happening is extremely high. So by that lens, it's like, well, that must have been the time. You know, it's like what's the chance that, you know, you spin a wheel or you play roulette and there's 35 numbers? What's the chance that you're going to land on the number? Well, the chance at any given moment is 1 out of 35. What's the chance that if you play all night long, that eventually your number's going to hit? Well, it's actually really high. So understanding statistics helps you to so that's just one sliver of statistics. And understanding that helps you to understand how to read research as well, because some findings, they'll say, they'll say, we found to a p-value of 0.001 that these two numbers are correlated. Well, it's still a chance that it's coincidence. You know what I mean? And when you understand that, then you can read the research through informed eyes.
Yeah. I mean, like in your example, the thing that's tough is that you might never, ever, ever in your entire life have another event like 9/11.
Right.
So what makes the odds not as common is that, well, that happened to be a dream that you remembered, which you probably don't remember most dreams, right before probably the biggest news event of your lifetime. So therefore, that makes it like, but just like with the universe coming to being, sometimes things happen. Right. Now, if this happened a lot to a lot of people, and we could predict it, now we'd have to form a theory about it.
Right.
And I think that's the part
and that's never happened.
Right. That's the thing that keeps
dreams.
missing. When people say like, well, I can read people's minds, and then they try to do experiments about it, and it doesn't reliably work.
Right. So when you understand statistics, that one sliver of it, you can actually understand. So sample size, for example, a lot of people misunderstand sample size. They'll look for sample sizes of like thousands of people, and they'll say like, that's a good study. And a sample size of like 50 people or even 10 people, not valid. It's actually not true. Right. It depends on the method. It depends on the conclusions. It depends on the where it lies. Like an fMRI study, for example, it's so expensive to do an fMRI.
Right.
I mean, imagine you have to get a subject to agree. One, you have to put them in an MRI machine.
Right.
Anyone out there know what an MRI machine looks like and how it operates? It's a process.
Yeah.
It's expensive, those MRI machines as well. Then you have to stimulate the brain somehow and like have them look at pictures while they sit still, and you have to make them sit still while you measure, and then you inject them with certain compound that highlights oxidization of certain areas of the brain.
Right.
You measure it. That is so expensive. But if you do 10 people and 9 out of 10 have similar results, that's a good study. And you had a sample size of 10. Now, were those just 10 random people that happened to be like that? Could be. You're going to have to replicate it. But it's still a good study. Now, if you ask 10 people that you know whether or not they think Trump is going to win the next presidency or something, or whether or not they're going to vote for Trump, that's not a good study.
Right.
I think most of us understand it. So sample size is something that we need to focus on, but there's nuances to it. Replication. This is a big problem in particularly my field of complete lack of or very low levels of replication. You need things to be replicated, depending on the claim, hundreds of times from different angles in particular before you can say anything. Like, for example, and I'm only 80% sure of what I'm about to say, but hopefully I'm not wrong about this, so take what I'm saying with a grain of salt because I didn't research this prior to doing this, but there was a big study that came out in a TED Talk of this woman about the power pose. Did you remember hearing about this?
The what?
The power pose. So it was this sensation. A lot of listeners probably remember this. It was like 5 years ago-ish. There was this research that said if you do the power pose like Superman, you put your fists on your hips and you stand like Superman.
Yeah.
And you do that for like 5 minutes or whatever. Then you have higher self-esteem. You perform better cognitively. People see you more favorably.
Perfect.
It was this pretty interesting finding. It's this whole field of somatic psycho. I can't remember what they call it. Body psychology, I think, or something.
Of the secretology.
And it kind of makes sense. It's like, according to other empirical research, it's like if you believe in yourself, you tend to believe in yourself.
Sure.
If you have high self-esteem, you tend to act in more positive ways about yourself. People tend to like you more when you have higher self-esteem. Standing in the power pose seems to be in that direction, right? And she had done the studies. She and her colleagues had done the research, and she had done the TED Talks, and everyone was convinced it was a thing, particularly among women. Thousands upon thousands of women were standing in the mirror doing power poses before they went to an interview.
All right.
And then replication happened, and they found no effect from the power pose.
Right.
So what does that mean? That means the power pose doesn't seem to have an effect in the way that the original study, particularly the conclusions that were brought forth from the original researchers. Why is that? Well, because people are trying to sell books.
Right.
That, for every person who was on a TED Talk is trying, 9 out of 10 of them are trying to sell something. They're trying to put their kids through college, and part of that is involved in them giving a TED Talk. Well, there's a little bit of motivated reasoning there to not be skeptical of their own results,
right.
Maybe even deny replication, maybe even not try to replicate, maybe even try to massage the data, which happens, to make it positive. Because imagine spending, here's the process that researchers go through, and publish or perish. They literally lose their jobs if they don't have publishable papers. They're sitting in their office and they're like, shit, I got to come up with some kind of research thing. And it's got to be interesting. It can't just be like, I can't just replicate some. That's another problem with replication. It's not very sexy. So you're like, okay, what am I going to do?
Interesting. That's a catch-22. It's
right.
I could try to validate this thing, but that's not going to get me anything.
Yeah, and I might lose my tenure. I might not get tenure, or I might not sell that next book. No one wants to read the book of the person who replicated a study. You know what I mean? I replicated the power pose study. You know, no one, you're not going to get any TED Talks for that.
Unless you get lucky and you prove that it doesn't work.
Right. Well, then but no one wants to hear about that because it's not interesting.
Oh, that's true. Like you just proved the null hypothesis.
Right. It's like you didn't find anything. It's not interesting.
Lifting weights does nothing for you.
And they've actually done studies on studies to find which studies get published, and null hypothesis studies are drastically more
makes sense.
More
sadly.
Rejected. Yeah. You know, no one wants to, for whatever reason, no one wants to read a study of, we had a question about that power pose and we found nothing. Like no one wants to see that study, and so they just don't even publish it, even though it's rigorous.
But it's written somewhere in some doc somewhere.
It's in a drawer. So I have plenty of colleagues who desperately tried to get their research published, and it just never got published. Wow. So it's not like every study is published. It's a minority. Anyway, so you're sitting in your office, you're like, I got to come up with something interesting to study. Okay, well, I'll do this. Okay, I got to raise the money. Okay, I got to go to meetings. I got to sell people. I got to do the power pose before I go in and try to sell and get grants, you know, from the uppers or from whoever. I've got to convince graduate students to do my work. I've got to give lectures and inspire people and get them into my, you know, I'm slowly building this like team, and it's all basically on one person's shoulders. A lot of especially psychology. Biology, it's usually like teams of people, you know, like labs of people, you know, and CEOs. But in psychology, it's often just like one person, one professor is just like, this is my thing. They get all these people together. They get the money. They set the methods. They do 15 studies. They drag, you know, thousands of graduate students through as participants through the study. And at the very end, there's just a little tweak you can do, just a little tweak to the numbers. That's like not cheating. That makes the difference between not a very strong signal and a pretty strong signal.
Right.
Well, which one are you going to do? And this is 6 years later. This is 6 years of your life. You've been giving talks, dinner parties. What are you doing? Oh, I'm studying the power pose. 6 years later, you're like, you find out, so there might not be a signal here? I thought there would be a signal. If there isn't a signal, no one's going to publish it. All those people I dragged through this are going to be like, why did you do this to us? You had this hypothesis, and it was wrong. What a worthless piece of shit researcher you are. I'm going to go spend time with this other researcher who actually finds something interesting.
Right.
So science is not just this altruistic investigation of nature. It is particularly in psychology, it is a ego-driven slog. And anyway, so replication, effect size is another thing. Until recently, a lot of published articles, they wouldn't even list the effect size. So, for example, let's say you have, well, let's do Democrats, Republicans. So let's say a study comes out and says that Democrats are they have a significantly higher IQ than Republicans.
Right.
Okay. So, you know, the p-value is very low. Science has proven, on average, they won't even say on average, they'll say Democrats are smarter than Republicans.
Right.
When you dive into the research, you go, okay, well, one, it's on average. There's two bell curves, and one bell curve is slightly higher than the other. Then you dive in even further, and sometimes they don't even list this, but if they do, you find that the effect size is 0.05 IQ points.
Sure.
So the difference between IQ 100 and 101 is almost imperceptible. It's there, but it's pretty slight. In fact, it's probably in the error bars of measurement. And you can have a 0.05 on average. So, you know, Democrats on average have an IQ of 100.05 and Republicans have an average IQ of 100. Basically a meaningless difference in average. In essence, Democrats and Republicans have the same IQ on average. But there's a slight little difference, and what you can say from that, because it's not wrong, is there's this, you know, Democrats have a significantly higher IQ than Republicans. But unless you say the effect size, it's misleading.
So this has been a scandal with a lot of drugs because, they'll do things like such and such drug showed 200% improvement over the competition.
Right.
And it was like 0.01 instead of 0.00, or something, like, in other words, like the original effect of the other drug's still not good. Like but this one's just teeny bit better. But when you compare those two numbers, it's a big increase.
Right.
And it still has no positive effect on the body.
Right. Or the effect is so small that if you knew about it, you would say, well, both of those things are basically worthless.
Like I recently heard one of these real stories about it's I think a statin drug, I think it was, and how when you compare it to there's things you can eat, ingest naturally that have better impact than these specific statin drugs, but the way they would advertise it, it would make it sound like double your chances or whatever. I forget what the details were, but it's because they were only talking about in comparison to something specific. And so it's like people don't get percentages, right? So if they were saying, like, let's say it doubles your chance of survivability or something like that. But the asterisk is in comparison to some other little caveat, right? And in reality, it only, in their studies, it might have added like a day to some percentage of the,
Right. So yeah, this is good. So just to reiterate what you're saying is, someone could come forward with a pill and say that this pill, in comparison to this other pill, will increase your lifespan by 400%.
Yeah.
And you're like, whoa, 400% lifespan?
Yeah.
Sign me up. But the other pill extended your life by 5 days.
Yeah.
And this is extending your life by 20 days.
Right.
That's 400% of 5 days.
Right.
So on average.
Yeah.
So that's part of the problem with our inability to understand math. I got to race through because we got to do, but I want to take a break. So let's do that, Berto.
Yeah.
All right, we're back from the break. Please become a patron of the podcast by going to patreon.com. That's how we statistically know that you love us. All right, so that's number 2 is learn how to read research and probably take a class in college. 3 is find experts who seem to know what they're talking about. That's what Humberto was doing. He was searching for an expert who seemed to know what they were talking about. Other examples would be like Mythbusters, Smarter Every Day on YouTube. Do you watch Smarter Every Day?
No.
Mark Rober.
No.
On YouTube. New York Times, these kinds of places. It's not obviously a slam dunk, but just trying to find experts, asking me about psychotherapy is a good idea. Asking me about climate change or diet is not a good idea. Number 4, be skeptical of claims that have any of the following markers. Let's see. Be skeptical of claims that put money in someone's pocket, like Dr. Oz. But this can be taken too far because, like, sometimes people, anything from big pharma, they will disagree with. It's like, oh, big pharma, they're just in it for the money. It's like, okay, money can taint one's motivations about promoting certain ideas, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's what's happening. So just be aware of that. Be skeptical of claims that support someone's political ideology. This is an obvious one, right? People, for example, Democrats saying that research shows that Republicans are stupid. It's just like, well, just be skeptical. It might be true, but you just got to be skeptical. Or Republicans using research to support that climate change isn't that bad or isn't happening. These people have political ideology that, for whatever reason, holds values that sort of motivate them to cherry pick certain studies. Be skeptical of claims that are based on anecdote or a single study. Be skeptical of claims that denounce entire disciplines. This is
Flat Earth.
Well, yeah, but those are pretty obvious. But things like everything you've learned about diet is wrong.
Yeah, no. I know it's so easy for us to laugh Flat Earth off. And you've talked about this. You have friends in your life. Like we know there's people that will watch those videos and buy into it.
Right. But there are more common things.
Sure.
Like, what your doctor will never tell you.
Sure.
So that kind of claim, it's writing off an entire discipline. It's possible, but usually it is complete crap.
Right.
Anything that just says,
forget everything you knew.
Every physicist, every astronomer, every teacher doesn't know this or something. Every psychologist,
right.
Blah, blah. Any claim that makes leaps. So be very careful. So the beginning of the article, they lay it all out, and it's all things you agree with. Watch for the leap. Crystals are a scientific wonder in that they combine certain electrons that line up in a certain way.
And we still don't fully understand how they're formed.
We still don't fully understand. And that's why my crystals will cure your cold.
Quantum physics is a perfect example here, right?
Well, okay, so that was my last one.
Okay.
Anything that mentions quantum theory
I see.
that's not actually talking about quantum theory is 99.9, if not 100%, indication of bullshit.
Yeah, this is the common one, which is, look, I don't know if you know this, but quantum theory appended everything we know about reality.
Right.
And it turns out that reality doesn't even exist until someone looks at it, which means you make your own reality.
Or
buy my book.
Or quantum entanglement, and somehow that makes you have ESP. Yeah. It's like you just, whoever's talking to you either doesn't understand quantum theory, which is likely, and or they know they don't understand it and they are just trying to trick you. So anything that mentions quantum theory, unless it's a quantum theorist, you should just be like automatic bullshit. Just like anyone who claims that a politician is a Nazi, it's just like, oh, so-and-so's a Nazi. It's a rule, it's just, it's a known trope that people have that you just, you've crossed the line. Maybe your point is, anyway. 5 is some topics are poorly reported in the media, and you just have to know those particular topics. Like lung cancer and cigarettes. Anything written on the internet, pretty safe, right? You're not going to see a lot of crank around. There's not a lot of people writing about how like you can smoke cigarettes and everything.
That wave died.
Yeah, there's for whatever reason there's certain topics in science, how cell phones work. There's not a lot of cranks out there going like, the scientists would like you to believe it's from RF, radiation. Right. And microwaves, but really it's from quantum entanglement. No one is writing like that. Right. Everyone's like, yeah, I'm sure the scientists understand how cell phones work. But there are certain other things, like diet, for example. 99% of the shit that's written on the internet, I would suspect, is complete bullshit on the internet. Anything regarding health, psychology, all the classic pseudosciences, ESP, Loch Ness Monster,
money making,
Bigfoot, UFO, ghosts. There's so much bullshit that is written on the internet.
And anything that says how much money you can make per day without leaving your house.
Right. That's another topic. There's probably 1 out of a million different posts that actually contain something that's helpful. And so you just have to know, okay, this person's talking about diet. Right away, I have to be careful about handing myself over to. Number 6 is be skeptical of breakthrough research claims. So, Berto, which of these seem credible? I actually pulled these from the internet. These are headlines.
Okay.
AI. So these are breakthrough claims of last week.
Oh, just last week?
Yeah.
Oh, fun. I like
AI, artificial intelligence, may be as effective as medical specialists at diagnosing disease.
Okay. I mean, that's a very broad claim.
That's a breakthrough claim.
Well, yeah, but I mean, if they were talking about...
The claim is, we don't need doctors anymore.
That claim is ridiculous. But if the claim was for certain kinds of tumor detection in spectrography or in X-rays, ML is now at a level where it can actually outperform doctors.
Right. So you've probably seen these studies. It's probably something related to that, of just like in a very niche application, AI or machine learning is probably a better way of putting it, is a good tool for physicians to use in addition that will help them catch things that they wouldn't be able to catch otherwise. Are robots walking around diagnosing diseases better than medical specialists? No. So again, that headline, and that's the other thing, any headline, you just have to go like, automatically, I'm going to assume it's stupid. Right. It's clickbait, people. Yeah. Okay, another one. Coral die-off predicted as oceans heat up.
I do believe that ocean heat has a correlation with coral health. So if they mean complete coral die-off in the next week, no.
Right.
But if they mean a trend over time, yes.
So this is a pretty big claim, is the coral is going to die in the oceans as the oceans heat up. But you and I have background information on consensus around oceans warming up, global heating and global warming, and how coral responds to different temperatures. So that headline stands to reason.
Yeah.
NASA says they'll return to the moon again and again.
NASA says that they'll return to the moon again and again in the next 600 years.
But it's a pretty big claim, right?
Sure.
So how do you know if that's credible?
I mean, I'd like to see what they mean by NASA. Was it the head of NASA? Was it some guy that interned
why are you
at NASA?
Skeptical? I mean, they've gone to the moon before. Why?
Because they haven't gone back in decades.
One, they haven't gone back in decades.
And the funding has dried up.
Two, we know from other sources, from credible sources, that NASA doesn't have the budget.
Right.
That our government, like something like 2% or something of our budget, or I don't know, 5% or something of our budget in the 60s went to NASA.
Right.
Today it's like 0.1%.
Yeah.
So they just don't have the money, and it just seems like, okay, plus from my understanding of NASA, they're just like, okay, and Trump was saying, we got to go to Mars. And then the next day, all the astronomers and all the people at NASA were like, okay, great, Trump. How about actually funding that project? Because telling us to go to Mars we would love to go to Mars, but we need the fucking money.
We need the money, Lebowski.
Yeah. Last one. North America's bird population has decreased by 30% since 1970. North America's bird population has decreased by 30% since 1970. So that's a pretty big claim. Are we skeptical? Does it seem credible?
I don't know anything about birds in North America, but given that there's been massive die-offs all over the world and so many species, and that we've driven species extinct all over the place, I guess I would look into it, but it sounds like it could happen.
Right. We know from other consensus reporting that there have been massive extinctions. We are at the beginning of some people say we're in the middle of a mass extinction. So 30% kind of makes sense. Plus, there's always a general extinction rate anyway. Last one here. Air pollution exposure has made children, N of 7,000-ish people, air pollution exposure made children more likely to visit the emergency department for anxiety, depression, adjustment disorders, and suicidality. This study adds to the growing evidence that air pollution harms kids' mental health even in the short term. That was another headline.
Well, knowing that lead in gasoline alone caused irreversible damage for years, I do know that environmental factors in the air can have a dramatic effect. So maybe.
Yeah, maybe. But also, I'm skeptical of this. Mm-hmm. Now, let's look at it. And I actually looked at the study. Large sample size, you got 7,000 people. So something. But causation. So you have one group of kids who has lots of air pollution exposure. You have another group of kids who has lesser air pollution exposure. And you don't actually know they're exposed because the method was based on like where they lived.
Yeah.
They could, the kids who live in the low air pollution area could have a father who likes to work on his car in the garage and regularly like pumps exhaust. Like they don't know that because they didn't actually study the air pollution. They didn't put a sensor on each of the kids' head.
Yeah.
they actually just said, well, you live in this neighborhood, so and we've measured the air pollution in the air. So that's one thing.
And if you live in a neighborhood where pollution is higher, likelihood is there's a billion other differences between those neighborhoods.
Exactly. Higher air pollution neighborhoods tend to have lower socioeconomic status, lower education, lower family cohesion,
right?
Lower general health.
Or imagine if they used we went to Shanghai, where air pollution is very high. We measured kids there. And we went to, rural Nevada, and we measured kids there.
Right.
Those worlds are so different in a billion ways.
Right. Chinese society, blah, blah, blah. So the causation isn't demonstrated, so we just don't really know. Effect size, it's not even given. So again, how much more mental health problems were the air pollution kids experiencing?
Right.
Was it 0.001 more? Yeah. But a significant difference? Or was it 10 times the rate? Yeah. I mean, again, they didn't even give it in the article. There's just all sorts of... Okay, so the last tip here is become familiar with cognitive biases and distortions, and I'm just going to rattle through these. Perception is not reliable. Memory is not reliable. So when someone talks about I did this and this happened, even studies that ask that.
Right.
So you ask people, sometimes they'll say we've proven that people in Denmark are happier than people in the United States. Well, how do you measure that? There's not a happiness blood test. You have to ask people in Denmark, how happy have you been recently?
Yeah.
How happy, just tell me in the past year, how happy have you been? One, memory is fallible. Two, how does one interpret happiness? Anyway, motivated reasoning. All of us do this. We all want, for example, with Humberto's diet person, or I'll just apply it to myself. If I see a study that refutes that humans are at least partially responsible for climate change, I am much more likely to disregard it, even if it's strong science, because I have motivated reasoning. I have decided for myself that climate change is a thing and that humans are contributing to it. And anything that contradicts that, I'm very likely to be even though it might actually be credible. And so we're all victims of that. And so when you understand that, then you are better off at thinking critically. Learn proper logic. This is actually a pretty complicated thing. There are entire courses on the philosophy of logic and epidemiology and everything. It's a very complicated thing. How do we know what we know? How do we work out things? It's not just A equals B and therefore B equals A. There's a lot of weird things that we do that when you study it more, you understand it better. Also, we have a tendency to project things onto randomness. Pareidolia, they call this. A common example is you look at the clouds and you see an image, like a penis or something. A lesser example is you wear your lucky shirt during a football game, your team wins, and you think, oh, it must have been my lucky shirt.
Did you ever watch that It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia episode?
Yeah. When the Philly, the Eagles are in the Super Bowl. Caca, caca. So actually that episode was a two-parter, I think.
Yeah, it was.
And the first part I loved, and the second part, it just seemed to... I don't like when shows go real gross with lots of puke and blood, and that show kind of goes in that direction sometimes, and it's just okay, I don't need to watch that. Another thing is confirmation bias, For example, people will conclude that when there's a full moon, weird things happen. They'll be like, oh yeah, that's a thing. You wouldn't believe what happened to me. The amount of weird things that have happened to me over the years during a full moon, something weird will be happening, and I'll be like, wait.
Is it a full
moon? They'll check. Boom, it's a full moon. Okay. Now, that's normal. Totally, it's a human bias. All of us do this.
Right.
Unless you understand that you have a tendency to do this, you will fall prey to it. The fact is that when you actually look at the hard data, nothing weird happens on a full moon. the same amount of pregnancies, the same amount of births, the same amount of crimes happen regardless of the phase of the moon. In some instances, there was a slight uptick in crimes during a full moon. And the speculation is, well, it's just easier to see. So you can cat burglar a little bit more easily at night, when it's a full moon or there's some kind of signal like that. But anyway, but a lot of studies that they show there's no difference. Because why would there be?
That there could be. But this is the thing with all of these things. There could be any number of billions of trillions of unknowable reasons for things. But that's why we run studies and we try to, because, gravity. Tides.
And who knows?
Tides go in, tides go out. You can't explain it.
You can't explain magnets. Also, our tendency to not know how little we know. This is a measured bias. They call it the Dunning-Kruger effect. There's an empirical bias that all of us have. The less we know about something, the more confident we are in our ideas about it.
Yeah, actually, for some reason, I actually don't have that problem.
Yeah. This is why I, at times, will want to talk about things such as diet or politics on this podcast. And I very quickly, it's a practice. I feel very confident. I'm going to talk about Bernie Sanders. And then I have to say, wait a second, Kirk, you're not an expert on politics. You're a complete fucking lame ass when it comes to, you're a lay person. Yeah. You consume the news on Google, for Christ's sake. You don't know what the fuck you're talking about. And the chance that you're going to come across overly confident about something is extremely high. And so in your casual conversations, fine, but on the podcast, you cannot talk about that.
Unless it's an opinion about a movie.
Which is fine. Well, I actually feel kind of like you and I have a little bit of an expert opinion on at least critical.
We watch a lot of movies.
Yeah, and have read a lot of critical takes on movies and stuff. Anyway. But politics is extremely complicated, particularly I'm not a politician. I'm not privy to the conversations that happen. I'm not actually in the Oval Office having these. I don't know. It's all filtered through the goddamn media. So I just now I can have opinions and I can vote and I do. By the way, I've never missed out on a vote. Every single vote since I was 18. All the primaries, all the propositions, every single time.
So we have you to blame.
Yeah. And so. Well, just look at the track record of Seattle and Washington. I think
it speaks for itself.
Yeah. So the point is, though, that when we talk, or when you're listening to someone talk about something, just because they're extremely confident doesn't mean they know what the fuck they're talking about. It's also kind of a mansplaining, narcissistic.
No. So I get triggered by the whole mansplaining thing. I just got triggered on Facebook the other day. So some gal on Twitter or something.
Wait, can you explain to me what mansplain means?
Mansplaining is a conflation of problems. So there's a certain personality type out there that likes to redundantly over-explain things to people.
Start with what happened.
Okay. So some gal on Twitter posted a joke, and it was a joke. Forget the joke. Anyways, someone replied, and in either the driest humor way possible, which is possible because that's a little like me, corrected the supposed mistake of the person, but it wasn't a mistake. It was a joke. You don't
want to give the specifics?
No, I would if I remember. I just don't remember the damn.
Well, in
joke.
The ballpark, so we understand the context.
It was just a comment on Twitter about something that has a double entendre, and then the person corrected the double entendre as if they didn't get that it was a double entendre.
Oh.
So as an example, let's say someone said, "What's a double entendre?" Like,
I like my movies fast and furious.
No, like pianist and penis. Let's say pianist and penis or something, right?
Oh.
Someone makes a joke about like, "I love me a big pianist," right?
Okay.
And then someone comes and says like, "I think the word you're looking for is penis," or something like that, right? Oh, but it's like, well, and I'm butchering the joke and the thing because it has nothing to do with this at all. The point is the dude made a dumb comment, right? It's either he's being very sarcastic and unfunny, but like in this kind of dry way, or he literally didn't realize what the joke was. In either case, he got trounced on by the internet, which I'm totally for. Like, sure, that was unfunny. She made a funny comment. You're not funny. Fine, we'll trounce on you. But many of the comments were like, there you go, mansplaining away. And I'm like, really? Because again, this person, that's their personality type.
Well, so I wasn't there, and I would support that use of that because it's definitely a male thing to do on the internet. As a person who's been...
I found it.
Okay, you want to read it?
Yeah, okay. So the joke was, and it's funny, every seafood restaurant in DC should have a special this week called Squid Pro Quo, because of the quid pro quo of scandal, right? Every restaurant in DC this week should have a special called Squid Pro Quo. It's funny. Some guy, and this was a gal, some guy replies, actually, the expression is quid pro quo.
Right. So
not squid. It's
right.
Latin.
Right. So this is, I'll allow it, although it's a gray zone of the usage of the term mansplain. And I do agree, the term mansplaining for, I would say, 1% of women is overused. There's 1 out of 100 women, they either don't really understand what mansplaining actually means, or they just love to use it because they think it's funny and interesting. It's sort of like when the word creep became kind of real popular about 5 years ago. Like young women were just like, oh, that's creepy. Oh, you're creepy. And like there were like a few women out of 100 who anything that sort of bothered them, they were just like, oh, that's creepy. And it was like, I don't think you understand what that word means.
Let me mansplain to you what the word really means.
Like if they would be, at the McDonald's, and an older man, a manager, would be taking their order and would say like, all right, well, have a nice day. I'll have the food out to you in a little bit.
Oh,
and
that's creepy.
Yeah, and they'll be like, oh, creepy. It's like, it's not fucking creepy. Maybe it's awkward and you didn't like it. But creepy is like, it's there's a sexual,
there's an extra level that
like a sexual predator level of creepy. Like you can't just apply it to any old man.
So did you used to walk up to girls' tables and say, actually?
No, of course, But anyway, so there's certain people who will sort of bastardize or overuse the term mansplain. This one I'll allow it because it's a frequent thing on the internet where men, and take it from someone who gets fucking mansplained to a lot by men on the internet, who now it's a stretch because we don't know the mind of the commenter, but there's a whiff that the commenter walks around in a superior state of mind, saying to himself, I'm smart and everyone else is dumb, and particularly women.
Yes.
And oh my God, she got that thing wrong, and I'm gonna correct her. And it's just like, dude, did you stop to think you don't understand the fucking joke?
Right. And so one of two things is true.
And that's a mansplaining thing. Why? Because men are taught, not that it's not their fault, but they're taught that they have to be smart. They have to be dominant. They have to be in control. They need to correct other people because that asserts their worth. And so they latch on, they look for things to refute. And that's why YouTube fucking sucks in the comments section.
That's what I totally disagree with, because in my life, I have been corrected, in quotes, way more often by females than by men. And I think it's a personality type. Yeah, agreed. There are many vectors to being, shall we say, splained to. Yeah.
And men are perhaps slightly more likely, it's hard to know, to do this sort of thing based on the way that they're socialized. But certainly women can splain as well.
And I guess I also, maybe I was wrong, maybe this was my bias, is I thought mansplaining had a little bit to do with sort of, here, little lady, let me walk you through this. And there is.
And
right?
If you're a woman, you ask the average guy, let's just, you just go around, you take a group of 50 people and you ask all the cis men in the room, how many of you have been repeatedly and noticed that women walk up to you and will look down on you like, oh, little boy, you don't know what you're talking about.
Right.
And let me explain this to you. Right. About, let's say half or a third will raise their hand. Oh, yeah, I've noticed that as a pattern in my life. My wife does it. My mother does it. My boss at work does it. There's another woman at work who just always talking about it. How many of the women you ask, they'll all raise their hand. They'll be like, oh, my God. And I can name 5 to 10 people off the top of my fucking head who talk to me like I'm a child.
Right.
And
And I'll grant you that, for example, in my experience, it very well could be more of a racial thing, like a racist thing, because the experiences that come to mind were generally older white women over-explaining things to me. And so, sure, it could be like, oh, this poor Latin boy doesn't know what the fuck he's thinking.
Which is a whole other phenomenon.
Right. And it could be.
Of white-splaining. White-splaining is absolutely a thing.
But I guess maybe the reason it bugs me is because that person either has a very sarcastic sense of humor, in which case it went over everyone's head, or they are that person. And that person would have answered that same way had that comment been from me or from that lady or from a kid or from an old person, because they just are that person. They're like, I must comment and I must make my voice heard. And we all know these people. So it just bugged me. I was like, that's not just because they're mansplaining to a woman. They're just that person.
Well, you're looking to the internet as a rational, wonderful place. It's particularly Twitter. I fucking hate Twitter. I didn't even know you looked at Twitter.
Well, no, but this was on Facebook. It was someone posting a thing about.
So we're back to the Dunning-Kruger effect. None of us know the things we don't know about. We tend to underestimate how little we know about it. We also tend to see things fairly easily. Like another cognitive problem is when we tend to trust our perceptions.
Yeah.
Like, for example, when I was a kid, probably 7 or something, I saw like 9 UFOs. I remember exactly where I was in my car, like noon or something. I look ahead, sunny blue sky, and I see during the daytime, I see these lights in the sky, and they're in this formation, and then they start flying around, and I was like, "Whoa! I just saw a UFO. I just saw like 9 UFOs." The chance of it actually being a UFO, the chance
or an
of
alien, let's say.
The chance of it being an alien is almost zero. The chance of it actually being something that was actually there is also almost zero. But I was convinced, man. I saw that thing, but it wasn't, and I always remembered. I was like, well, I saw you. And then later on, I was like, I bet you anything, I just hallucinated it. And that's a hard thing to accept. It's a hard thing to say. I either hallucinated something in the moment, or my memory is bad. And we tend to default to, well, I did see it, and my memory is good, when in fact, I'm positive I saw nothing. Another thing is that we don't like unknowns. We don't like things to be unknown. And so when, like with diet, for example, it's extremely distressing, and you kind of described that earlier.
Yeah.
That as you interface with the science, you start to realize after, you started with the premise like, oh, there's answers. I just need to find them. You start looking to the experts to find the answers, and you start to discover, wait, I think the scientists don't have the answers.
Right.
Maybe they have some answers, but maybe everything they're saying right now is wrong. I mean, there was a time when they thought fats were bad.
Right.
And that was wrong. And so, wait, is it unknown? Are my questions like not going to be answered in my lifetime?
Right.
That's extremely distressing. And when we are in a distressing moment and we have a solution to us, like a charismatic speaker, then it's very soothing to have this guy stand up and say, I have the answers for all you people who are looking for answers. Let me lay out a charismatic, argument, and
the Jordan Peterson effect.
And you will be soothed, and you'll be, answers to life's questions. I have the answers.
Right.
And so to become comfortable with the fact that we don't know. A classic example that we can all hopefully relate to are UFOs. UFOs are unidentifiable flying objects. They're unidentifiable. We don't know what the fuck they are, or the person who viewed it doesn't know what the fuck they are. That doesn't mean they're fucking aliens. It just means you don't know what it is.
Right.
So why do you have to fill in aliens? Why? Because we have a hard time accepting that we don't know what it was. I just saw a thing. I don't know what that was. Well, in my head, if I tell myself it's aliens, it somehow feels better. And we just have to understand that we tend to. The last thing is we have cultural biases, of course. In the diet world, we have this notion of natural. If something's natural, that means it's good. That means it's safe. That is not necessarily true. It's not even a good heuristic to go really on any level, particularly on labeling, because naturally, the natural label on a product at the grocery market means nothing. Try to find anything around in that aisle that says chemical. Like they all say natural, because there's no federal regulations around what exactly natural means. It's just a thing that you say. If it's like, anyway, the point is natural in our society, and I'm guessing other societies, means safe and good. Chemical, anything that looks like a chemical, is in our culture is perceived as something bad and unsafe. Also not necessarily true. Could be. There are plenty of natural things that are terrible for you. There are plenty of chemicals. Everything is chemical is a thing. Mm-hmm. Water is chemical. Plants are chemical. We are chemical. Our proteins are chemical. Everything's chemistry. So all these notions of natural versus chemistry is a cultural notion that we're biased towards. Even though I know this to be true, and I've listened to a lot of experts talk about this, when I see a chemical in my food, it freaks me out. But I have to say, well, that's just a belief. It could be bad, but it also could not be bad.
I think one of the challenges is that for millions and millions of years, no creature had an ability to go much far beyond what was available in their environment as far as consuming it. Now, of course, if they ate a poisoned plant, they would die, right? But in general, so even an early human of, say, 10,000 or let's go 100,000 years ago or something, they could do a couple things. They could I'll heat this thing up and it'll change its composition a bit. But now we have the ability of jumbling together things in ways that no one's had even a beginning of a chance to evolve, support for in their bodies. And no studies really to validate whether in the long term these things will work well or not. And hence why we get things like cigarettes and things like chemicals that don't work well with our bodies and plastics and things like that. So I think what happens is we've now seen so many cases throughout the last, 50 years or something of, we shouldn't have put lead in the paint. We shouldn't have, that we're like, yeah, chemicals are bad.
Chemicals are bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We were wrong to mess with nature.
But take iron, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like iron's a fucking chemical. So anyway, that's why we have these notions. And so you just have to understand that about yourself and understand that marketers are going to exploit that.
Yeah.
And charismatic sellers of books and TED Talks are going to exploit that. Okay, so to review the different rules. 0, understand our science is young. 1, look for the consensus. 2, learn how to read research. 3, find experts who seem to know what they're talking about. 4, be skeptical of claims that have certain characteristics. 5, some topics are poorly reported by the media in general, and so you just want to always be skeptical. 6, be skeptical of breakthrough research claims, particularly ones that say everything you know is wrong. 7, become familiar with all the cognitive biases and distortions, which are really pretty complicated. At the end of all of that, I hope that you aren't disheartened, because a lot of people can look at all this and be like, well, who has time for all this stuff? Mm-hmm. And there are certain shortcuts. Find resources that seem to know what they're talking about. Berto has found his.
For one topic.
On one topic, which is diet. Once you find that resource that, seems to be credible and isn't trying to sell a particular ideology, and that's always the thing, is like, do they seem to be pushing the same idea over and over and over again? And do they seem to benefit from that notion? Find those sources. Maybe it's even like a particular newspaper or something online. Find that, a podcast, for example, and once you find that, then sort of rely on that as one of the sources that you look at. And so you don't have to constantly search the internet for every single angle to things. If you find those certain thought leaders, then they can usually sort of be your guide to that arena. And the other thing is really just become familiar with the fact that there's certain topics that we just don't know much about yet. And we're kind of just grasping in the dark, and we're discovering like little things. And you might die before we ever figure these things out. And that's not happy. It's not a happy place to be in, but it's reality. And once you accept that, I think life is better. All right, well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Humberto and I are about to step outside and take some promo pics with my wife, Stacy. She's going to take some new promo pics of us.
Woo!
I'm a little insecure about my hair.
I thought you said prom pics. Came with my cummerbund and my little, what do you call the little flowers you put in
the what do you
corsage
call it? Corsage. Yeah. Cummerbund. Oh yeah, cummerbund. Was the cummerbund, you were supposed to have it up or are you supposed to have it down?
Benedict Cumberbund?
Yeah.
Down.
I thought we said it was up because then it would catch the crumbs as when you're eating. All right, well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Thanks for joining us out there. Please take care of yourself. Stay skeptical because
you deserve it.